Mercer Shavelson from New York City. Now let's hear what some jazz musicians and experts have to say about the place of jazz in American history and contemporary culture. Mercer Shavelson from New York City.
I would say that jazz
is
more alive than ever.
More alive than ever.
People who say that are definitely
not
thinking of the same jazz that I think of. Because when people say jazz is old music, it's irrelevant. They're thinking of the style of swing. They're thinking of Duke Ellington. They're thinking of Charlie Parker. All amazing music from the 30s and 40s and all that. But no one, when they're saying that, is talking about Brad Mehldau or like Kenny Garrett or Tigran Hamasyan. People, when they say jazz is irrelevant, I guarantee you they don't know who the leading musicians are in the field right now.
Tracy Hyder Sutton from New York City.
Jazz really came to life in New York during the Renaissance. So Harlem was this cultural mecca. So you had writers, and you had musicians, and you had painters and designers, all converging on this space, many of whom came during the Great Migration from the South, from the southern United States to cities in the North. A lot of them landed right here in Harlem. And so there was this convergence of art and style and experience right here in Harlem. It was all right here. And from all of that inclusion, from all of that art, jazz begins to take on a different form than it had in New Orleans.
Kenyatta Beasley from New York City.
Jazz is America. From a historical standpoint, we have a group of people who are brought here against their wishes, who somehow, some way, have been resilient in the face of whatever's happened in America, combining elements from their African ancestry with European elements, and therefore creating, just like jazz, something that just never existed. It's like the true meaning of jazz is always like that little bit of struggle that's in there, and that's part of the African American or just the black experience in America. You need that. You need that kind of like counterpunch. You need that different opinion than just European. So when you think about it, the entire American experience is really based upon those two things coming on, like European culture and African culture. And it's really, well, it's kind of like the only place where it really exists. It started in New Orleans, where you had this little town that had so many different influences. I mean, look where we are right now. We're in New York. We've seen so many different cultures of people in like, 30 seconds? And you hear so many different languages. You need a place like New Orleans or America where cultures come together and make music. And jazz is really America's classical music.
Background: from slavery to the civil rights movement.
Even though President Lincoln legally abolished slavery in the South in 1863, this did not lead to a better life for the technically freed African Americans there. After a brief period of freedom and civil rights during the Reconstruction era, blacks were forced back under the control of Southern whites by a combination of local ordinances, economic pressures, and social customs that undid the progress they had made since the Emancipation Proclamation. By the 1890s, an oppressive and racist culture called Jim Crow had spread throughout the South. Suppressed blacks either stayed and worked as tenant farmers or sharecroppers on the lands of white owners, or left for the North, for nearby towns, or for the biggest southern city, New Orleans. Jim Crow attitudes worsened through the first half of the 20th century, leading many southern blacks to join the Great Migration to northern cities. The conditions they found there were not always better. African Americans who served in the military in World War II were determined to fight against Jim Crow laws and attitudes when they returned home. Eventually, a mass movement to actualize civil rights was sparked with Rosa Parks' refusal to move from the white seats of a public bus in Montgomery, Alabama. A black minister, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. rapidly emerged as the leader of the mass civil rights movement that went on to bring significant, though far from complete, improvement in the status of Black Americans, not only in the South, but throughout the country.
Finally, let's hear from a few more people involved in today's jazz scene. Wayne Siegel and Chico Freeman from Chicago.
Well, it's different kind of music. It's unique. It's special. There's influences from all other types of music in jazz, and you can hear that on stage.
All other music are influenced by jazz. So rock, pop, R&B, rap, hip-hop, all of those forms of music, other genres, have been influenced. I mean, even back in the early days of hip-hop, they were sampling jazz records. But at the same time, jazz has always been encompassing. Jazz started as a combination of African music, but it also incorporated European harmonies. And then it took those harmonies and advanced it. But it also took music from other countries, like Japan. And we've all have incorporated different instruments and from other parts of the world. So jazz is kind of an all-embracing music.
Well, here we are today. You know, and we got a house full of people. And this past weekend we were sold out. Young people in their 20s and younger people, too young to get in here, younger than 21. And I still sneak them in and let them hear the music. There's college students, university students that are learning jazz. So is jazz dead? It'll never die.
Sometimes Chicago is referred to as the second city. Actually, Chicago was the first city before New York, before the Harlem Renaissance. I can name you a lot of people, famous people that were born here, came from Chicago. Jenny Goodman, Gene Cooper. Louis Armstrong wasn't born here. He came from New Orleans, which people generally say is where jazz started, but came here to Chicago. Miles Davis and his family from Illinois. Miles was born in East St. Louis, but his whole family has come from Chicago. And Chicago has always been a center of culture because during the migration of slaves and black people from the South, Chicago became hit first. And from here, they often went to New York. In some parts of the South, they went directly to New York. But Chicago was the first place where people came and they thought they'd get a better life. So a lot of creative stuff comes from here.
Adonis Rose from New Orleans.
You know, the thing about New Orleans is it's a melting pot of a lot of different cultures. Places that remind me of New Orleans would be places like Salvador in Brazil, or, you know, Havana, Cuba. Those places were also colonized by European countries, but the African influence is prevalent in those places. Same thing in New Orleans. The thing I love about New Orleans is community. It's the people. You know, people make a place. And people here are very resilient, they're very resourceful, very creative, and they take that all around the world. It's hard to separate New Orleans musicians from New Orleans music, which is jazz. So, I mean, we love playing jazz. I think if there is a place in the U.S. where people understand where the music comes from and how to go back and deal with the history of the music and play it correctly and teach other people how to do that, it would be New Orleans. We can play music from the 1930s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s. We can play it all. Whether it's, you know, Louis Armstrong or Miles Davis, we can do it all. It doesn't matter who it is. I'm a New Orleans musician, and I bring those elements of New Orleans music with me everywhere I go.
Sam Jackson from New Orleans.
Actually, I started because my dad played with the Reebok Brass Band, Preservation Hall, a lot of known bands in the city. My goal is to travel the world and have my band be the best that they can be. What I like is that you're able to play music wherever you want, whenever you want, however you want.
Terry Gibson Jr. from New Orleans.
I have a long history with my family. A lot of trumpet players, my family, a lot of drummers. Music
was always in my life since I was born. My grandmother had a singing group. My grandfather had a singing group. My mother sung. My daddy rapped and sung and played instruments. So like music always was part of my life. All since I was growing up, so that's what I wanted to do. I do have a lot of pride to say New Orleans. I was born and raised there, man. So all 28 years of my life. It's a lot of different cultures you grew up around. So learning that and experiencing that in your life, but it changed your life forever. You know, I have memories of that. Or the first time you heard that brass band, I seen this brass band. You know what I'm saying? It's all about memories. Good memories at that.
Ashlyn Parker from New Orleans.
I'd say the biggest appeal in jazz compared to other styles of music would be the amount of freedom that each listener and musician can engage. Very loose structures have basically allowed the music to go from early jazz all the way to modern jazz. But it was that loose structure that allowed so much freedom in the music. Bebop basically marks the end of jazz as a dance music. And if the main goal isn't to make people dance, then it's just more about personal expression. So I think there is just a way larger conversation on expression itself. One song can be sad, and the next song can be happy. So I think the freedom of personal expression, it's just 100% the main thing that separates jazz from other genres. I think there's just a timeless quality about jazz and the freedom of expression that is timeless. I think the word is more dated than the actual art form. I know plenty of jazz that's not called jazz. Basically, since the 60s and 70s, there's been a lot of fusions. So I think there's still many possibilities on different fusions of other styles of music. I love to see, for instance, Japanese musicians doing jazz versions of old Japanese folk songs. If it's not been done before, then how is it dated? I heard this great jazz version of Sukiyaki. And it was great. It was a jazz version. And then that's going to be sampled in 20 years. So I love to challenge that jazz is dated.
Beth Utterback from New Orleans.
Well, WWOZ is the only station that really plays their music all the time. And we not only play their music, but we have their jazz musicians coming in and out. They play live, but we also play their CDs, we play their music. So it gives a worldwide audience to local musicians. You know, the goal is to keep the New Orleans music alive to the world, not only to keep the musicians that are no longer here alive, but their music alive. But all those young musicians that you saw, those 14 and 15-year-olds, they may have their own bands. They will carry on the legacy for the musicians that are passing on or retiring. So just keep it going, keep going forward. And as music evolves, to stay up with that as well. 5 years ago, we didn't have a hip-hop show, but we have a hip-hop show at night now because that's part of the New Orleans musical scene. So not only to celebrate the past, but kind of embrace the future, whatever that's going to be. I think that's our job.
I do really like jazz music. Jazz music started in the 1920s, from ragtime. So they evolved jazz music and ragtime into the modern music. Jazz also has been changing a lot, taking a lot of different differences from other music. This is the cultural experience taking place, especially in New Orleans, where there are a lot
different. There are a lot of black people there. And they are allowed to play the music and get their own in the park. Whereas other states doesn't allow black people to play the music. Jazz singing group. More loud than ever. Relevant swing. Harlem Renaissance. Thanks to the World War One, they've got economical affluent in Harlem, New York, and it flourishes. But it helps flourishes there. Flourished African American cultural movement called Harlem Renaissance. In the Harlem Renaissance, they developed a different kind of music, like jazz. Harlem Renaissance. I've never heard of Harlem Renaissance before now. I learned. Great, Harlem Renaissance. Thinking about the history. There were so many difficulties she faced. At that point, we are standing. If I was there, I wouldn't like keep trying, keep making an effort. Got someone's wishes, someone's wishes, resilient, face up in the face. Abolish technically speaking. Do. Jim Crow is the law that suppressed black people. passion is expressed by